Hello, and welcome to Day by Day True Crime Stories, the podcast where we explore a different crime or justice milestone from this day in history. I'm your host, Kona Gallagher, and today is December 4th. On this day in 1972, 7-year-old Steven Stayner left his elementary school in Merced, California, and started walking home. But he never made it. Along Highway 140, a man posing as a church worker alongside a convicted child molester in a white Buick stopped him. What followed was a nightmare that would last for more than 7 years. When Steven finally escaped in 1980, he was hailed as a national hero, but the pain and damage caused by his abduction would reverberate for the rest of his life. Today, we're talking about the abduction of Steven Stayner. Let's get started. Steven Gregory Stayner was born on April 18, 1965. He was the third of 5 children to Delbert and Kay Stayner. He had 3 sisters and an older brother, Carrie. The Stayner family lived in Merced, California, a small farming community known as the Gateway to Yosemite. Neighbors later described the family as ordinary, working class, and close-knit. Now, in 1972, kids like Steven had a level of freedom that's almost unimaginable today. They rode bikes through the neighborhood, roamed orchards, and walked to school on their own. For Steven, December 4th started out just like any other day. But by that afternoon, his disappearance would mark the beginning of one of California's most haunting child abductions. That afternoon, 2 men were driving into Merced from Yosemite. Kenneth Parnell, a convicted sex offender, and Irvin Murphy, a 43-year-old man described as gullible and easily influenced. Parnell had convinced Murphy that he was a religious man on a mission to raise a boy in a good Christian home. Murphy, following Parnell's instructions, handed out religious pamphlets to young boys walking home. When he approached Steven, he claimed to be from a church looking for donations. Steven offered to help, and Murphy asked him to show him his house. Soon, Parnell pulled up in his white Buick. Steven, believing that he was helping a church worker and getting a ride home, got into the car. But Parnell didn't take Steven home. Instead, he drove 40 miles into the foothills to a remote cabin near Cathy's Valley in Mariposa County, shockingly close to Steven's own grandfather's property. That night, Parnell began sexually abusing Steven. When Steven asked to go home, Parnell told him a lie that would shape the next 7 years of his life. That the court had awarded Parnell custody because his parents had too many children and didn't want him anymore. Back in Merced, when Steven didn't come home, his parents reported him missing. Police searched extensively, but there were no witnesses, no leads, and no sign of where Steven had gone. Parnell quickly began reshaping Steven's life. He gave him a new name, Dennis Gregory Parnell. Keeping Steven's real birth date and middle name, Parnell was able to enroll him in school as his son. They moved frequently throughout California, from Santa Rosa to the tiny town of Comche in Mendocino County. Parnell worked low-paying jobs and passed himself off as a single father. To outsiders, they looked like an unconventional but real family. In reality, Parnell continued to abuse Steven. He also gave Steven unusual freedoms for a child. He was allowed to smoke, drink, and skip school. Experts later described these behaviors as grooming tactics. They were methods to create dependency and blur lines of control. Over time, Steven believed that his parents had truly given him up and that no one was looking for him. This belief kept him from running. But back in Merced, the Stayners were living in limbo. Flyers were printed, tips trickled in, and the family pleaded for information, but years passed with no solid leads. Steven's case faded from the headlines, but never from his parents' mind. Meanwhile, as Steven entered his teenage years, Parnell started looking for a new, younger victim. He tried several times to get Steven to help him kidnap another child, but Steven always found ways to sabotage the plan. Then, in February 1980, Parnell succeeded, with help from a teenage acquaintance of Steven's named Sean Poorman. Together, they abducted 5-year-old Timothy White from Ukiah, California. Just as he had done with Steven, Parnell cut and dyed Timothy's hair, gave him a new name, and began feeding him the same lies. Seeing Timothy suffer pushed Steven to a breaking point. He realized that he couldn't let another child go through what he had. He decided that it was time to act. On March 1st, 1980, with Parnell away working a night shift, Steven took Timothy and left. It was raining as they walked across dark roads trying to hitchhike. Timothy was crying and was unable to remember his full address. When they couldn't find his babysitter's home, Steven found the address of the local police station and took him there. Suspicious officers separated the two. After some initial confusion, Steven gave them a name and a line that would soon echo across the country. I know my first name is Steven. By the next morning, both boys had been reunited with their families. Kenneth Parnell was arrested. He would later be convicted in 2 trials for kidnapping, but not for the sexual abuse that Steven had endured for years. Because of California law at the time, the statute of limitations had expired. Parnell was sentenced to just 7 years and only served 5. Murphy and Poorman were also convicted on lesser charges. But returning home was far from a happy ending for Steven. He struggled to reintegrate into a family that he barely remembered. He had missed nearly 8 years of childhood, and now he was a teenager trying to fit into a world that had moved on without him. But despite his trauma, Steven chose to speak out. He gave interviews, worked with child safety organizations, and helped with the production of the 1989 TV miniseries, I Know My First Name is Steven, which brought renewed attention to his case. But tragedy struck again. In September 1989, Steven died in a hit-and-run motorcycle accident at the age of 24. More than 500 people attended his funeral. Among them was Timothy White, who was then 14 years old. He served as a pallbearer for the man who had saved him. In 2010, a bronze statue was unveiled in Merced's Applegate Park. It shows Steven hand in hand with a young Timothy walking towards safety. Steven Stayner's abduction on December 4th, 1972 will forever be remembered as a story of horror, loss, resilience, and heroism. He was a child who was taken by a predator and shaped into someone else. But when another child needed saving, he found bravery within himself and saved them both. Thank you for joining me on today's episode of Day by Day True Crime Stories. If you found Steven's story compelling, please subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. It'll help us grow. And be sure to join me again tomorrow as we explore another significant event in true crime history. Until then, stay safe and remember that behind every headline is a life worth remembering. Day by Day True Crime Stories is a Little Monster production.
Hey, you can do it!